Imagine that today, Monday the 3rd of February, was the day that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, pulling America into World War III. Now, in 1941, you would have received the uncontested news from a limited number of trusted sources. You have the radio, newspapers, and government announcements. To clarify, government announcements that people actually trusted, unlike today. War itself was rather simple, to be honest. Planes dropped bombs, ships launched torpedoes. Perhaps most importantly, the enemy was physically in front of you. But today in 2025, the real question is this: are we sure it's not fake news? Within hours, millions of conspiracy theories would have spread out online. And who's the real enemy in the first place? Is it Japan? Non-state actors like hackers or terrorists, deep state actors from within? And I'm not sure you'd really hear it either. No screams, no air raid sirens. Today's attack would be in the cyberspace, targeting online infrastructure, banks, power grids, data. And assuming it isn't a hoax, would people trust newly inaugurated US President Donald Trump to deal with it, like 81% of Americans supported Roosevelt in declaring war back in 1941? As human beings, we're not really geared to live with uncertainty. So we learn to understand patterns and make unconscious assumptions, like things will fall to the ground. Faces generally consist of 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Objects still exist even when they're out of our sight. These are the kinds of assumptions that allow us to function from day-to-day life. They're our instinct as animals, because if we're not sure that we're being followed by a predator, we've already been devoured as prey. So the way that we perceive the world is founded on an infinite number of little bits of meaningless data, which are then given meaning by our brains. We strive to increase certainty in our minds. So when we're unsure about something, when we're uncertain, we always begin with a question: who, what, where, why, and how? And we create answers, like gods cause natural disasters and enabled good harvests. Often, we filter out the things which don't conform to our worldview, because it's safer, because it feels better. That's confirmation bias. Sometimes, we'll move mountains just so that we're not uncertain. It's the basis of behaviors like the sunk cost fallacy, where we continue pouring money into something with no gain in order to maintain the delusion that we made a successful investment. And when we can't do anything about our state of uncertainty, like when our inner ear is saying something fundamentally different to our eyes, we suffer. Travel sickness. But today, we are currently in one of the most uncertain periods of human history. We were hunters and gatherers, we became storytellers and cave painters, we sought love and power, we became inventors and murderers. Now, we are mastering algorithms, drawn into a new paradigm of data, racing rapidly towards our own destruction, constantly searching for the ultimate recipe for happiness, immortality, and divinity. We always seem to want more. Which is quite funny, really, because in trying to escape the paradoxes of life and define a world on our own terms, we've created what I believe to be the ultimate paradox: the paradox of progress. As we're becoming wealthier, healthier, and more technologically advanced, we're becoming ever more anxious, stressed, and dissatisfied. According to the NHS, last year, 1 in 5 young people aged between 8 and 25 had depression or similar mental health conditions. And that number is only increasing. There's a simple statement which seems to sum that up. The richer and the more successful you are, the more depressed you're likely to be. Now, there are a few different components at play here, pitting the optimists like Hans Rosling, who talk about how far we've come in metric terms, against the pessimists. Poverty, racism, discrimination, sexism, violence, you name it, it's all at its lowest point in recent recorded history. But as living standards improve, so do our expectations of what constitutes a good life. We're running an endless marathon on the hedonic treadmill, the idea that we adapt to new conditions. And so the happiness boost that we get from things like winning a game or getting a raise or buying new shoes rapidly wears off and returns straight back to its normal baseline. We're trapped in a cycle of ever-rising expectations, which mean that you and I are rarely satisfied with what we have. It's why sales for each new Apple iPhone model remains so high, why the bigger, better, newer slogan of consumer culture products is simply so effective. So, on the one hand, we have the uncertainty of our identity. As you all know, social media has only exacerbated the paradox of progress by exposing us to nothing but the highlight reels of other people's lives. Now, interestingly, those are now called simulacra, a word which means representations or imitations of people or things. And actually, that word was coined in the late 16th century and used to refer to statues and paintings of gods. Which is quite apt, really, considering the hours spent editing a photo to make sure that it looks perfect. Is it bright enough? Do I look tanned and skinny enough? Is there a wisp of hair in the wrong place? And then we have the uncertainty of decision-making, which stems from the fact that everything is just so accessible. Too accessible, you might say. We're suffering from something we've never had before, an overabundance of choice. And theoretically, that should make us happier, right? But should it be comedy, drama, romance? Should it be from the For You section or new releases? Modern day life offers us endless options, from smaller things like picking a Netflix show to choosing an entire career pathway. But actually, having too many options leaves us feeling paralyzed, full of FOMO, and less satisfied with our final decisions. And then we have the more dangerous problem of the uncertainty of truth. We have an overwhelming amount of information thrown at us every day, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to differentiate between opinion-based and fact-based content. Generative AI can craft stories which agree with either side, even make photos as proof if needed. So what's fake and what's real in the echo chambers of our lives? Lastly, the most important one. We're suffering from a powerful uncertainty of purpose. You see, all of the above would have been just fine if only we could justify it in some overarching manner. But today, we live in a world which is losing its meaning. Philosopher John Vervaeke calls it the meaning crisis, the idea that people today are struggling to find a sense of purpose in our lives. So what that means is, alongside material progress, is coming a sense of emptiness and discomfort that we just can't fight off. Because wherever you look, the world is changing. Except one thing. Artistic expression exists outside the paradox of progress. It doesn't run on the hedonic treadmill. It resists more. Unlike technological advancements, always chasing faster speeds, bigger data, and shinier upgrades, the progress of art is not linear. You don't upgrade Da Vinci's Mona Lisa the same way you upgrade an iPhone. No one demands a better version of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. When you have an earworm, a song which is stuck in your head that you might play for hours and hours on repeat, it's not a better version each time you listen to it. It's simply a different experience. Art progresses not by becoming more efficient, but by offering new perspectives every time that you interact with it. Art has no finish line. It's not created to solve problems in the same way. Instead, art is created for the sake of creation itself. Now, that might sound utterly trivial in a world so obsessed with productivity, but therein lies its power. While everything else becomes entangled in the chase for bigger, better, newer, art is free from the tyranny of perfection. It doesn't strive for answers, but thrives in the unknown. It welcomes uncertainty, ambiguity, doubt, the very things which we as humans instinctively flee from. It is perhaps the only domain in human life where not knowing is celebrated rather than feared. Take abstract art, for example. Consider a Rothko painting. 2 blocks of color on canvas. Now, you might look at that and feel utterly confused, unsure of its meaning. And that's precisely the point. There is no hidden caption explaining the truth of the image. We're uncertain, and so we create answers. In a world where we're constantly seeking clear, universal truths, art teaches us that meaning doesn't need to be inherent. We can create meaning. So while progress demands certainty, art thrives in uncertainty. While progress demands perfection, art celebrates imperfection. While progress demands productivity, art finds joy in the process. In the famous Greek myth named after him, Sisyphus is a character condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down every time he reaches the top. It is the quintessential narrative of a meaninglessly repetitive task. But the famous philosopher Albert Camus concludes that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, because he finds meaning in the struggle itself rather than the end result. So you see, we are not gods. We are the very same humans who once painted on cave walls. The only difference is that back then, we understood something we've long since forgotten. Progress doesn't always need a purpose. Sometimes it only needs a story. Thank you.